As we enter November, many faculty will begin to wonder, what can I change in my course for the next semester? One area that faculty may consider changing is creating affordable learning materials, which can include open educational resources. In this episode, we speak to OER specialist Chris Younkin to discuss what are affordable learning materials, what are open educational resources, and how can faculty find high-quality resources that will save their students money. So thank you for joining us for another episode of Southern Utah University's Teaching and Learning Podcast. All right, welcome back to another episode of SUU's Center for Teaching Innovation Podcast, where we focus on teaching and learning. Today, I have Chris Younkin here, and he works at SUU's library and has been doing quite a bit of research and looking into affordable learning materials for students. Chris, would you like to take a second to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so one of my roles as a scholarly communication librarian is working on our affordable learning initiatives. So one of those is we have a textbook collection, the T-Bird Textbooks collection, and we have a lot of the textbooks for GE classes and some of the other upper division classes that are a little more expensive, and especially for classes that have higher enrollment. So that's one of the ways that we try to help students save money. But then I'm also involved in our affordable learning materials like OERs, which I'll talk more in detail. That's open education resources, and other options that professors can use to try to combine library materials or online materials or other types of low-cost materials to make the learning more affordable for students. I've been here for 5 years. I started out as the learning experience librarian, which was more instructional design and curriculum development for our information literacy classes, and then moved over into this space. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do more of this work is because of my experience as a student. So when I was a student, I had a lot of things kind of stacked against me. So I was a veteran, and I was non-traditional, and I was, low income, and I'm also on the autism spectrum. So basically any sort of demographic group that has, challenges in college, I kind of fit into most of those. And I had no preparation for college. When I was growing up, my parents, had come from a working class background. My dad was a mechanic. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. So, the word college never came up in my house when I was growing up. And I asked my mom later, why didn't you talk to us about going to college? And her answer was that since we were poor, we couldn't afford it. She didn't want to get our hopes up. So it took me a while to kind of get to a point where I could actually go to college. And by that point, I was already married. My first year of college, my wife was already pregnant with our first kid. And, I was working full time and going to school full time. And that's kind of how it went. It took me a really long time to get through school. But one of the things that was always a really big challenge was buying textbooks. It was always, this was pre, Amazon and all that kind of stuff. So, I was always trying to scheme ways to get cheaper textbooks. I mean, I would drive to a bookstore like on the other side of town to try to find a used copy or something. And, but I was also an English major. So it was a little bit easier for me because I wasn't having to, buy Campbell's Biology for $500 or whatever it is. So that was one of the advantages of being an English major. One of the few advantages, I guess, was that textbooks were a little bit cheaper. But as I started getting into being a librarian and working in higher education, it's always been on my radar. Kind of looking at the cost of textbooks and how that affects students.
And it's interesting. I just met with Dr. Saunders, and he was talking about how the textbooks have increased, and that how a professor may say, "Oh, I can get a book for $40." That doesn't mean that's what the students are going to pay, and I think that's a valid thing. So when you talk about affordable learning materials, how would you define that? So someone who's listening that's like, okay, well, it's $50. That's not too bad. Is that?
Yeah, I think generally when we talk about affordable learning materials, it's the total cost of the learning materials required for a class it's around 40 to 50 bucks or less. So that could be less expensive books, or it could be sometimes you could have a course pack that the professor puts together themselves and that the students pay for. But really, it could be anything from, less expensive books up to, something that's free. And I think, free is optimal, I think, for most people. But yeah, just reducing the overall cost of the textbooks. And so when I talk about affordable learning materials, there's kind of a set of things that I have, and these could be used in any combination. So, library materials that students can access for free, and that could be journal articles through a database, or it could be, an ebook that's accessible through the library website, or we have other options, like I mentioned, the T-Bird textbook collection. Those are textbooks, they're print textbooks that we buy, and then students can come in and use those for 2 hours at a time per checkout. And they can check them out as often as they want, but so those are the things that the library can provide. There are also different combinations of online resources that you could get. It depends on the information, but open education resources are really kind of a target, I think, because those are open education resources. Just to explain that a little bit, these are learning materials that are created explicitly to be used for free and to be able to be used in lots of different ways. And the reason why they're open is that they're most often openly licensed through something like Creative Commons. And so that's where, because when you create something, you become the copyright holder. And so you can put an open license on it, and then that allows people to be able to use those. Sometimes they can do whatever they want with them. There are other types of licenses that limit, for example, non-commercial open licenses where people can't take that content and sell it. Some of the licenses restrict how the content can be modified. Attribution is always a part of it, so you always have to give attribution to the original creator. But within OER, there are lots of different kinds of materials that are created. Kind of the best case scenario is that there's already a textbook that exists that's a full textbook on the subject. And those do exist a lot more for the more basic levels of the classes, like 1,000 and 2,000 level classes. But it can also be things like slides or worksheets or assignments or things like that. So there's a big variety of what's available out there.
Yeah. I want to go back to the T-Bird textbooks. This is, I knew you had some textbooks, or I didn't know it was called the T-Bird textbooks. Mm-hmm. As someone who teaches classes here at SU, if I wanted to get my textbooks put into that so that my students could go check those out, what steps do I need to take as a adjunct faculty member or a faculty member to go in and get my textbook added to your collection? Yeah, so our T-Bird textbook collection, a few things to know about it up front is that, one, we only do print. So if your textbook is an online textbook, and more textbook publishers are going more to exclusively online content. And so if it's an online textbook, or if you're teaching an online class, then that this may not be the best option. But kind of that aside, what the collection is we've tried over the last several years to collect textbooks for GE classes. It started out as sort of a more limited amount of funding, and so the focus really was on the highest enrollment GE classes, and so we've kind of followed that. But as we've expanded the collection, we've moved in, and I think at this point we have almost all of the 1,000 and 2,000 level GE class textbooks that are available in print. We have those represented, and we do purchase from the bookstore here, and so
the beginning of the semester, we run over there with a wagon and buy up whatever books we need, and we try to keep it updated. And so if we work with the professors to find out if they're using a newer edition, or sometimes multiple sections of the same class will have different people teaching it, and they'll use different textbooks. So often we'll have more than one textbook for the same class, but
that's great to know that, like, if I change textbooks or I upgrade editions, I need to let the library know, hey, that would be a good thing for me to do, to say, hey, I've updated my edition.
Yeah. And one of the things that I do is before the semester starts, I'll look up who's teaching that class, and I'll send them an email saying, hey, we have your course. And so it's by course. And so not everyone who's teaching the course is going to have the book in there, but it's a way of just checking ahead of time. And so you might get an email from me saying, hey, we have I don't know what class you teach, but we have your textbook, or we have a textbook for this course. So go to the list and check it out and see if it's up to date, and if it is. And we've added textbooks that way because we found professors who are sort of teaching the class for the first time, but then they have a different book. And so we try to have all the most up-to-date books before the semester actually starts. But sometimes it takes a week to update it because we didn't know.
No. And so if the faculty member takes that extra step to say, hey, I've updated, it helps you out to make sure that you have the right books. I do want to talk about OERs because some of the courses I teach involve online learning. So I teach as part of the MIS program, teaching their instructional design foundations, assessment and e-learning, those kinds of courses. And I also use an OER in one of the education courses I teach, which is schools, diversity, and society. With my one course on assessment and e-learning, I was having students buy the book. It was, I think, $20 or $25. It wasn't a super expensive book. But then out of nowhere, I just stumbled across it as part of an OER collection at Penn State that anyone can access. As someone who is an instructor at SU or anywhere, what would you recommend as far as looking for your textbooks through OER sites?
Well, I think the most important resource is probably me. I know that sounds maybe a little bit arrogant, but really,
no.
I can help navigate through all of that because it does get complicated because it's not a centralized thing. I mean, open education has been around kind of in the form that we know it now. Really, kind of started within the last 20 years, and the way that you find it, it all depends on what your subject is. It all depends on what's available, where it's available, and you have to be careful because so under the most open CC license is the CC BY, which is attribution. So that's here's the thing I created. Anyone can do whatever they want with it. And so there are actually people or companies that vacuum all that up, repackage it, and sell it, right? And so you also might find multiple versions of the same thing because since you're able to modify it, people can make changes, and so they'll kind of different versions kind of proliferate online. There are some places like OER Commons is one place. OpenStax is a textbook publisher that does open textbooks, and Merlot is another one. But there are different, I guess, within sort of the wild west of the internet, there are more sort of curated sets of OERs that are available. But if you just go into Google and type OER about education or OER about instructional design, then you don't know where you're going to end up.
Oh, right.
And
yeah.
So
5 million hits in like 0.2 of a second, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And so, so learning to navigate those, you can also just look up OER repository. You could Google OER repository, and then that could get you to some of the more sort of curated, centralized places. But then within that, learning how to search within those systems can be kind of challenging. And so having someone there like me who can guide you through that process is very helpful and can probably save a lot of time.
And I don't take that as being arrogant. I say the same thing about like my instructional design team, my multimedia team, Canvas team. I don't know how many times we have a professor call us and say, I've been working on this problem for 5 hours and we fix it in 5 minutes. So, so no, I don't take that as arrogant. Know your resources. You're a great resource for locating OERs and affordable learning materials. I do want to delve into one other topic real quick. Inclusive access.
I'm glad you said that. I had it on my list of things to talk about.
Yeah, no, I want to bring it up because I'm working on my doctorate. And as part of that, I have found that all of my books are part of inclusive access through the institution I'm getting my doctorate through. I know SUU has inclusive access. And I've read reports saying that it's great, it's affordable for students. I've read reports that it's horrible, it's not really affordable for students. What is your take on it? I'm going to open that can of worms.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll just contextualize it a little bit first. So, as a student going into college, these students, they have a pretty good idea of how much tuition is going to cost. They have a good idea of how much housing is going to cost. But when it comes to textbook costs, which that's kind of the third, if you look at what are the biggest costs of college, you have tuition, that's the biggest, and then housing and, that kind of room and board, I guess. And then learning materials, cost of learning materials. And so with that, it all depends on what's the subject. So a chemistry textbook is going to be way more than like buying a couple novels for an English literature class, right? And so students, depending on what major they choose, I would assume that it's likely that they don't know what they're getting into as far as the cost of the materials. And there's research out there talking about the trade-offs. So students will either not buy the textbook because they can't afford it, and then they'll just kind of, fumble through the class the best they can, or they'll delay buying the textbook until they can kind of figure out their finances, or they'll trade, students won't eat because, the textbooks, or they'll take out loans. And especially here in Utah, I think, again, there's research that shows that students here in Utah are less likely to take out loans. And so it may mean that they have to work more. They may have family responsibilities. There's all kinds of considerations. So given all of that, in general, I say anything that can save students a couple bucks is probably better than not doing it. With inclusive access, there's a few things about it that I'll say I disagree with. The first is that it's not optional. So it's part of the course fees, and so it's a required fee. So that's one thing. And then it's also technology dependent. So you have to basically have high-speed internet to be able to access it. If you don't have it, because part of the package of inclusive access is the textbook, but also often, they'll have quizzes or they'll have assignments and things in there. And so even though it costs less than buying a textbook, it's once the course is done, students aren't going to have access to that. And so, I never really kept many of my textbooks. I don't know. Some students like to keep their textbooks. But if you buy a physical copy of a book, you can keep it forever. And so
or resell it back.
Or resell it back, even if it's, only 10% of what you paid for it. But
right.
But so the way that I think about inclusive access is that it's actually exclusive and inaccessible because you can only access it for the duration of the course. And I don't like that there isn't an option to opt out of it.
That's interesting because where I'm getting my degree from, we're able to opt out.
Oh, okay.
And the nice part with that is I do opt out because I don't like you were saying, it's technology dependent. And I have a visual impairment, So I like to tweak my text a little bit and have a dark background, white text, stuff like that. And so what I find is that sometimes some of these readers that go with the textbook don't allow for those options, or they're really clunky when it comes to highlighting text. And so I've actually found that it's easier to opt out, go to Amazon, get the Kindle version, read it in the Kindle app where I can manipulate all the text size, all that stuff, to help me read. But I know that there's some places that it's not. Where I came from, we were 100% digital text. We had just made that switch when I left. And I know there were some benefits, but again, it's that high-speed internet, because we always said, oh, you could highlight and share your notes with your students, and you could add a link to a video that explains it differently, or whatever the case is. But if you don't have that high-speed internet to watch that video, it makes it a bit of a struggle.
And especially because, not all of our students are here in Cedar City. And so, I've worked with students that, were out on the Navajo reservation in Arizona, and they didn't have really good, reliable internet where they were living. But you also bring up another point that is that textbooks are marketed to professors, not to students, because students don't get to pick, right? And so, like you mentioned earlier, you might get like a review copy or something, or you might, as a professor, be able to get a less expensive copy. But the professors don't experience the cost that students experience. And so, and these textbook publishers have these crack marketing teams that are always, going out. And one of the other things that so I have to qualify this a little bit. Part of my personality, I like to do as much myself as I can. Like right now I'm working on a research article, and I'm doing all my citations by hand. I'm not using citation generator. I'm typing them all out because I like to be in control of what I'm creating. And so as a teacher, I like to, so the classes that I teach, I actually have created all of, or co-created with others in the library, all of the materials that we use. But I know that it can be really tempting because textbook publishers will say, here's, you get the book, but you also get all the quizzes, and you also, so it's easy. You don't have to make anything. Here's all the tests, like everything is provided for you. My first thought is like, well, then why doesn't AI just teach the class? That's
that's a whole other podcast.
And I'm not trying to criticize, I know that being a professor is hard, so I'm not trying to criticize people for wanting to have that kind of, those kind of materials available to help them with their teaching. But one of the nice things about OER is that you can change it, you can adapt it, you can combine bits and pieces from different places into a more sort of customized set of materials for your students. And so so that's kind of where I'm coming from, kind of the DIY punk aesthetic, from when I was younger. But I like the idea of being able to make the course materials be something that is going to fit in with my teaching style. If I'm just getting a textbook, from a publisher, I don't have any control over the content. I don't have any ability to change anything. Maybe that's just me. I don't know.
No, but I think it brings up, that uniqueness and making the experience at SUU one of a kind for a student. When you're able to create courses where you've taken the time to do the research and put together articles and put together information that you've pulled from here and there. And
and I think, there's been a lot of research done within the open community about the benefits of being able to adapt the materials to the students that you're actually teaching. And so you can create your own sort of custom examples, or, you can add your own photos, like things so that the students that you're teaching can find themselves in the materials. And that at least seems to have a benefit. Yeah.
So we're going to take a break, and I'm glad you're bringing up students, because I want to continue this conversation and talk about what you've learned about students here at SUU and what you're seeing as far as affordable learning materials and our students with research you've done. Now that we have a much better understanding of what affordable learning materials, or ALMs, are, and open educational resources, or OERs, are, we need to understand what are we seeing here at our institution. Join us in part 2 of this conversation with Chris Younkin as we discuss what he has found in a survey that he sent out to SU faculty about the use of open educational resources.